The call of duty and the price of service. The cold desert wind howled against the flimsy walls of the military outpost, carrying with it the scent of sand and smoke. Captain James Riker stood near the edge of the camp, his eyes scanning the distant horizon. It was the last night of his third deployment, and while his team shared jokes around a dimly lit campfire, James remained lost in thought. The stars above seemed both beautiful and indifferent, a reminder of how vast the world was, and how small his troubles might seem to anyone else. But for James, the weight of his life pressed heavily on his heart. War had a way of changing people. James, once a bright-eyed young man with dreams of serving his country, now felt like a shadow of himself. His hands, calloused from years of carrying weapons, still trembled at night when the memories came rushing back. Faces of friends he'd lost in combat haunted him, and the screams of battle echoed in his mind. His body had survived the war zones, but his soul felt battered, bruised, and barely holding on. Amidst the chaos of his life as a soldier, one beacon of light remained: his wife, Lily. A schoolteacher with a kind smile and an indomitable spirit, Lily was everything James wasn't: soft, patient, and endlessly optimistic. She had stood by him through every deployment, her letters and video calls serving as his lifeline. Each letter from her spoke of home, of hope, and of the little joy she found in their modest life in North Carolina. But it was her most recent letter that had shifted something deep within him. "James, I know life out there is hard, and I wish I could be by your side every second. But I wanted to share some news that I hope will give you strength. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby. I can't wait for you to meet our child and hold them in your arms. This baby is the best of us, James, and I know you'll be an amazing father. Stay safe, my love. We need you home." James had read those words over and over, his heart swelling with a mix of pride, love, and fear. The thought of becoming a father was both thrilling and terrifying. How could he, a man who had spent years waging war, teach a child about love and kindness? How could he protect a little life when he barely knew how to protect himself from his own demons? The months following that letter were some of the hardest of his life. Every step on the battlefield felt heavier, every mission more dangerous. He couldn't afford to die. Not now. His child, a little stranger he hadn't met yet, needed him. Lily needed him. The thought of their family, fragile and new, was the anchor that kept him moving forward. Then came the ambush. It was supposed to be a routine patrol, a final operation before James's team rotated back home. But war had a way of twisting routine into chaos. The first explosion ripped through the convoy, flipping their armored vehicle like a toy. Dust and fire filled the air as James scrambled to his feet, adrenaline surging through his veins. "Hold the line," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Gunfire erupted from all directions, and James's team responded with precision and ferocity. Hours felt like seconds as they fought for their lives. When the dust finally settled, James was alive, but several of his men were not. The weight of their loss settled on his shoulders like a crushing burden. He had written letters to their families that night, his hands trembling as he tried to find the right words. No words could make sense of the senseless. In the aftermath of the ambush, James's commanding officer approached him with unexpected news. "Riker," he said gruffly. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, placing a hand gently on her stomach. "And so is our baby." Tears welled in Lily's eyes as she nodded. "They'd been waiting for you, James. We both have." For the next few weeks, life felt almost normal. James helped prepare the nursery, painting the walls a soft sky blue and assembling a crib. He and Lily took long walks through their neighborhood, talking about baby names and their dreams for the future. It was a fragile happiness, but James held on to it with all his strength. Then, one chilly November morning, Lily went into labor. James drove her to the hospital, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He had faced bullets and bombs, but the sight of Lily in pain made him feel more helpless than ever. Hours passed in a blur of waiting rooms and hospital corridors. Nurses came and went, offering updates and reassurances. James paced the hallway, his heart pounding with anticipation. Finally, a doctor emerged, a warm smile on his face. "Congratulations, Captain Riker," he said. "You have a healthy baby girl." James's breath caught in his throat. A girl. He hadn't dared to hope for anything so perfect. He followed the doctor into the delivery room, his heart racing with a mix of awe and fear. Lily lay in the bed, her face pale but glowing with joy. In her arms, wrapped in a soft pink blanket, was their daughter. "She's beautiful," Lily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Come meet her, James." James approached slowly, his eyes fixed on the tiny bundle in Lily's arms. When he finally saw his daughter's face, his heart swelled with love so intense it brought tears to his eyes. She was perfect, her tiny fingers curling against Lily's chest, her dark eyes blinking sleepily. But as James looked closer, a strange unease crept into his chest. Something about her features didn't match what he had imagined. Her skin tone was darker than his or Lily's, her delicate features bearing a striking difference to either of them. The joy he had felt just moments ago began to waver, replaced by confusion and a cold, sinking feeling. "Lily," he said softly, his voice trembling. How is this possible?" Lily's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, there was only silence between them. The joy of their child's birth was overshadowed by a question neither of them was prepared to face. The shadows of doubt. The sterile hum of the hospital room grew louder in James's ears, drowning out the soft coos of his newborn daughter and the quiet murmur of the machines monitoring Lily. He stared at the baby cradled in his wife's arms, his mind a whirlwind of emotions, love, confusion, and a sharp pang of doubt that cut deeper than any wound he had endured in combat. Lily's face fell as she saw the look in James's eyes. She clutched the baby closer to her chest, her protective instincts igniting. "James," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What are you saying?" "I don't know," James replied, his voice strained. I wasn't expecting this. She doesn't look like either of us." The words hung in the air like a thundercloud, dark and ominous. Lily's expression shifted from confusion to pain, and her grip on their daughter tightened. "James, she's our baby. I carried her for 9 months. I don't know why you'd even think otherwise." "I want to believe that," James said, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "But look at her, Lily. I've seen enough in my life to know when something doesn't add up. Please, tell me there's an explanation." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes, and her lips trembled as she tried to form a response. "James, I don't know what you're implying, but I would never betray you. Never. You know that." James felt the weight of her words, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing roots in his mind. He wanted to trust her, needed to trust her, but his years in the military had taught him to question everything, to trust only what he could see, hear, and prove. He hated that his instincts were now turning against the woman he loved. "I need some air," he muttered, his voice hollow. Without waiting for her reply, he turned and left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. Outside the hospital, the chill of the November air bit at James's skin, but he barely noticed. He paced along the sidewalk, his breath visible in the cold night. The stars overhead sparkled with indifference, their beauty a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within him. He had faced death countless times, survived ambushes and firefights, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The battlefield had its own set of rules, clear, brutal, and unyielding. But this was uncharted territory. The idea that Lily, the woman who had been his anchor through years of war, might have lied to him was a betrayal he couldn't comprehend. As he walked, his mind replayed every moment of their relationship. He remembered their first date, when Lily had laughed at his awkward attempts to impress her. He remembered their wedding day, when she had looked at him with such unshakable love that he felt invincible. He remembered the letters she sent while he was deployed, each one a lifeline that pulled him back from the brink of despair. How could he reconcile those memories with the doubt gnawing at his heart? Hours later, James returned to the hospital. He found Lily sitting in bed, their daughter asleep in her arms. The exhaustion on her face was evident, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. "I thought you weren't coming back," she said softly. James sat down in the chair beside her, his elbows resting on his knees. He took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Lily, I love you. You know that. But this, I don't know how to process this. I need to understand." Lily nodded, her expression resolute despite the tears in her eyes. "Then let's figure it out together. Whatever it takes, James." Her response surprised him. He had expected anger, defensiveness, maybe even denial. But her willingness to face the truth gave him a glimmer of hope. He nodded slowly. "A test. A paternity test. That's the only way I can put my mind at ease." Lily hesitated for a moment, her grip on the baby tightening. Then she exhaled and nodded. "If that's what you need, we'll do it. But James, no matter what that test says, I know this is your daughter. I felt it the moment she was born." James didn't respond. He simply sat back and closed his eyes, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The next week was a blur of appointments and waiting. James and Lily went to the clinic together, their baby bundled up in a soft pink blanket. The paternity test was quick, but the emotional toll it took on both of them was immeasurable. They returned home in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Their cozy cottage, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cold and distant. James spent his days tinkering in the garage, trying to distract himself, while Lily cared for their daughter with a quiet determination. The tension between them was palpable, a wall that neither of them knew how to break down. One evening, as James sat in the living room staring blankly at the television, Lily joined him. She sat down beside him, their daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. For a moment, they sat in silence, the only sound the soft crackle of the fireplace. "James," Lily said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "I know this is hard for you. It's hard for me too. But I need you to know that no matter what that test says, I have never stopped loving you. You are my husband, and you are her father." James turned to look at her, his eyes searching hers for any hint of deception. He saw none. Instead, he saw the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who had stood by him through every challenge life had thrown at them. "I want to believe you," he said, his voice breaking. "I really do." Lily reached out and placed a hand on his cheek. "Then believe me, James. Please." A week later, the results arrived. James held the envelope in his hands, his heart pounding as he stared at it. Lily stood beside him, her hand gripping his tightly. "Whatever it says," she whispered, "we'll get through it together." He nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed her. Slowly, he opened the envelope and unfolded the paper inside. His eyes scanned the text, his breath hitching as he reached the conclusion. He froze. "James?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. "What does it say?" James looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "It says she's mine," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "She's our daughter." Lily let out a shaky breath, tears streaming down her face. "I told you, James. I told you." But while the test had answered one question, it left another unanswered. Why did their daughter look so different from them? As James held his baby girl for the first time, he felt a wave of love and protectiveness wash over him. But deep down, the mystery remained. For James, the journey was far from over. The battlefields of war had prepared him for many things, but the battle for his family was one he would have to fight with his heart. And it was a fight he was determined to win. A shattered mirror. The morning after the paternity test results arrived, James sat on the porch of their small cottage, his daughter nestled in his arms. The first rays of sunlight painted the horizon in shades of gold and pink, a tranquil scene that belied the storm within his heart. She was his. The test had confirmed it. And yet, James couldn't shake the lingering questions. Her tiny fingers curled around his thumb as she squirmed in her blanket. Despite the doubts that had clouded his mind for weeks, the love he felt for this little girl was undeniable. She was perfect in every way, a tiny life full of possibilities, completely unaware of the tension that surrounded her. Inside the house, Lily moved quietly through the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The clatter of dishes and the soft hum of the kettle were familiar sounds, grounding James in a semblance of normalcy. Yet, their conversations had been few and strained since the results had come in. They were caught in a fragile truce, both knowing that deeper wounds still festered beneath the surface. Later that day, James decided to confront the lingering question head-on. He found Lily sitting on the living room floor, sorting through baby clothes. She looked up as he entered, her expression cautious but hopeful. "Lily," he began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I've been thinking. The test answered one question, but it doesn't explain everything. I need to know why she looks so different." Lily's shoulders sagged, and she set down the tiny onesie she was folding. "I've been thinking about that too," she admitted. "I don't have answers, James, but I want to find them. Together." Her sincerity struck a chord in him. He nodded. "Maybe there's something medical we don't know. Genetics can be strange. It's worth exploring." Lily looked relieved at his response. "I'll call the pediatrician tomorrow. Maybe they can help." The following week, they sat in a brightly lit doctor's office, their daughter sleeping peacefully in her carrier. The pediatrician, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, listened attentively as they explained their concerns. "It's not uncommon for genetic traits to skip generations or present in unexpected ways," she explained. "But if you're worried, we can run some tests to rule out any underlying conditions or anomalies." James and Lily exchanged a glance and nodded in unison. The tests were scheduled, and once again they were left waiting. In the days that followed, James found himself retreating to his garage more often. It had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could tinker with old tools and lose himself in the rhythm of fixing things. But now, the clinking of metal and the hum of the power drill did little to quiet his restless mind. One evening, as he worked on repairing an old clock, Lily appeared in the doorway. She stood there for a moment, watching him in silence before finally speaking. "James," she said softly, "I feel like I've lost you." He looked up, startled by the raw emotion in her voice. "What do you mean?" She stepped into the garage, her arms crossed over her chest. "Since you've been home, it feels like you're still at war, not with enemies, but with me. I've tried to be patient, but I need to know if you're willing to fight for us." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He set down his tools and rubbed a hand over his face. "Lily, I don't want to lose us. I've been struggling. The doubts, the questions, everything. It's been eating away at me." "And what about now?" she pressed. "You know she's yours. You know I love you. Isn't that enough?" James hesitated, the weight of his own insecurities holding him back. "I want it to be," he admitted, "but I think there's something deeper going on, something neither of us understands yet." Lily's expression softened. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "Then let's figure it out, James. Together. But please, don't shut me out anymore." He nodded, pulling her into a hug. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to lean on her, to let her be his anchor once more. The call from the doctor came a few days later. Lily answered it while James played with their daughter in the living room. When she hung up, she turned to him, her face pale but calm. "The tests came back," she said. "They didn't find anything wrong. But the doctor mentioned something interesting." James stood, holding their daughter close. "What is it?" She said it's possible that distant ancestry could be influencing her features. "It's rare, but it happens. Do you know anything about your family's background?" James frowned, trying to recall what little he knew about his family tree. His parents had died when he was young, and he'd been raised by an uncle who rarely spoke about the past. Not much, he admitted, but my uncle might know. That evening, James made a call he hadn't expected to make. His uncle, a gruff but kind man in his 70s, answered on the third ring. "James," the older man said, his voice gruff with age. "It's been a while. What's going on?" James hesitated before diving in. "Uncle Robert, I need to ask you something about our family. Do you know if we have any diverse ancestry?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Well, I never thought you'd ask about that," Robert said finally. "But yes, your great-grandmother on your father's side was biracial. She was a remarkable woman, proud of her heritage. But back then, people weren't as accepting. Your father didn't talk about it much, and I suppose it got buried over the years." James felt a wave of relief and guilt wash over him. Relief that there was a possible explanation, and guilt for doubting Lily so deeply. "Thank you, Uncle Robert," he said quietly. "Don't mention it," Robert replied. "Family history is complicated, James, but don't let it drive a wedge between you and what matters most." That night, James shared the conversation with Lily. She listened intently, her eyes welling with tears as he explained. When he finished, she took his hand in hers. "James," she said softly, "you didn't just come back from war to be a soldier. You came back to be a father, a husband. I know this journey has been hard, but I believe in us. I believe in you." Her words, simple yet powerful, pierced through the armor he had built around his heart. He looked at their daughter, sleeping peacefully in her crib, and felt a renewed sense of purpose. The doubts that had plagued him for weeks began to fade. In their place, a determination grew, a commitment to be the father and husband his family deserved. As he held Lily's hand and gazed at their daughter, James knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But together, they could face anything. The war in his mind was far from over, but for the first time, James felt like he was winning, rebuilding the foundation. The first hints of winter crept into the air, carrying with them a sense of renewal and hope. James woke before dawn, a habit ingrained from his years in the military, but now his mornings were different. Instead of donning combat gear and stepping into a world of danger, he walked quietly into the nursery, where his daughter lay in her crib, her soft breaths filling the room. Her tiny face, peaceful and serene, was a reminder of the life he was rebuilding. He reached down, gently lifting her into his arms. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and inquisitive, and James couldn't help but smile. She was his, a part of him, and for the first time, he felt the doubts that had haunted him begin to dissipate. "Good morning, sweetheart," he whispered, cradling her close. She cooed softly in response, her small fingers reaching for his face. Lily appeared in the doorway, her hair tousled and her smile warm despite the early hour. She leaned against the frame, watching the scene with a mix of love and relief. "You're a natural, you know," she said. James chuckled softly. "A natural at what?" "Waking up early." Lily shook her head and stepped closer. "At being her father. You might not realize it yet, but you're doing an incredible job." Her words hit him deeply. For weeks, he had carried the weight of his doubts, but her unwavering support had been a beacon of light in the darkness. He reached out, pulling her into a gentle embrace, their daughter nestled between them. In that quiet moment, the pieces of their fractured family began to knit back together, healing old wounds. Though the revelations about James's family history had provided some clarity, they also opened a door to the past that James wasn't sure he wanted to walk through. His uncle's mention of his great-grandmother stayed with him, sparking a curiosity he hadn't felt before. Who was she? What stories had been lost to time? And how did those stories shape the man he had become? One evening, as the first snowflakes of the season drifted outside, James sat down with Lily after putting their daughter to bed. They curled up on the couch, the soft glow of the fireplace casting shadows across the room. "Lily," James began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about what my uncle told me, about my great-grandmother. I feel like I owe it to her, and to our daughter, to learn more about where I come from." Lily reached for his hand, her touch gentle and reassuring. "I think that's a wonderful idea, and I'll be right here to help you." Encouraged by her support, James decided to dig deeper. Over the next few weeks, he pored over old family photos and documents that his uncle sent him. There were faded letters, grainy photographs, and even a diary belonging to his great-grandmother, a woman named Eleanor. Through her words, James discovered a story of resilience and strength, a woman who had faced prejudice and adversity with grace and determination. Eleanor's diary spoke of love, loss, and an unyielding hope for a better future. James found himself captivated by her words, drawing parallels between her struggles and his own. In her story, he found inspiration to move forward, to let go of the anger and doubts that had clouded his heart. The silent battles. While James focused on reconnecting with his family's past, Lily fought her own battles. Though she had been strong for James and their daughter, the weight of the last few months had taken its toll. She carried the pain of being doubted by the man she loved, and though they were healing, the scars remained. One afternoon, as James worked in the garage, Lily stood in the kitchen staring at a photo of their wedding day. She traced the edges of the frame with her finger, her mind drifting to the vows they had exchanged, the promises they had made, the love that had once felt unbreakable. She heard James's footsteps behind her and turned to see him standing in the doorway, his expression soft but concerned. "Lily," he said gently, "are you okay?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I'm just thinking about everything we've been through. I love you, James, but I won't pretend it hasn't been hard." James stepped closer, his hands resting on her shoulders. "I know," he said quietly. "I've put you through so much, and I hate that I let my doubts hurt you. You've been my rock, Lily. You've been stronger than I deserved." Tears welled in Lily's eyes, and she leaned into his embrace. "I just want us to move forward, James, to be the family we dreamed of." He held her tightly, his voice resolute. "We will, Lily. I promise. No more doubts, no more walls. Just us. A new beginning." As winter deepened, James and Lily began to rebuild their life together, brick by brick. They spent their days laughing with their daughter, sharing quiet moments over cups of coffee, and rediscovering the love that had brought them together in the first place. James's journey of self-discovery also brought unexpected joy. Through his research, he connected with distant relatives who shared stories of Eleanor and her legacy. These newfound connections enriched his understanding of who he was and strengthened his bond with his daughter. One snowy evening, James sat by the fire, holding his daughter in his lap, as Lily read aloud from Eleanor's diary. The baby's wide eyes darted between her parents, her tiny hands waving in the air as if she could sense the significance of the moment. "This is for her," James said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything we do, every choice we make, it's for her." Lily nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "She's our future, James, and she's lucky to have you as her father." In that moment, James felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The war, the doubts, the pain, they were still a part of him, but they no longer defined him. What mattered now was the life he was building with Lily and their daughter, a life rooted in love, resilience, and hope. The road ahead. The months passed, and the snows of winter gave way to the blossoms of spring. James found himself embracing fatherhood with a fervor he hadn't anticipated. He cherished every moment. The first time his daughter smiled, her tiny giggles, the way she clung to him as he rocked her to sleep. Though the road ahead wasn't without challenges, James and Lily faced them together. They learned to communicate more openly, to trust more deeply, and to lean on each other when life felt overwhelming. Their journey was far from over, but they walked it hand in hand, their love stronger for the trials they had endured. And as James stood in the sunlight one spring morning, holding his daughter high above his head while her laughter filled the air, he realized that he had finally found his peace, The battles of the past were behind him, and the future stretched out before him, bright and full of promise, strength forged in forgiveness. Spring was in full bloom, and the air around James and Lily's little cottage was alive with the scent of blossoms and the hum of new beginnings. The past few months had tested them in ways neither could have anticipated, but the trials they endured brought clarity to what mattered most: their family. Yet, healing was a process, and wounds, even those unseen, required time to close. James had begun to embrace the role of fatherhood with a zeal that surprised even himself. Every milestone his daughter achieved felt like a small victory against the doubts and fears that had once consumed him. Her first laugh had sent a ripple of joy through his heart, and her growing curiosity reminded him of the wonder the world held, something he had forgotten during his years of service. One bright morning, James stood in the backyard, holding his daughter as the gentle sun cast a golden hue over their home. He pointed out a butterfly flitting through the garden, her little hand reaching out toward it in delight. It was in these quiet moments that he felt a deep sense of peace, a stark contrast to the chaos of his previous life. The path to reconciliation. While James was finding his footing as a father, his relationship with Lily was still a work in progress. Though the love they shared was steadfast, the cracks left by doubt and mistrust lingered like shadows in the corners of their hearts. Both were determined to mend those cracks, but the journey was not without its struggles. One evening, after putting their daughter to bed, James and Lily sat on the porch, the cool breeze carrying the scent of fresh rain. James stared at the horizon, his thoughts heavy. Finally, he turned to Lily. "Can I ask you something?" he began. Lily looked at him, her expression calm but curious. "Of course. How did you stay so strong through all of this?" he asked, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "When I doubted you, when I let my fears get in the way, how did you keep going?" Lily's gaze softened, and she reached out to take his hand. "James, you were fighting your own battles. I knew that. I also knew that the man I married, the man I love, was still in there, buried beneath all the pain and confusion. I held on because I believed in you, in us, and because I knew we'd find our way back to each other." Her words pierced through the guilt James had carried since that fateful day in the hospital. He tightened his grip on her hand, his voice low but steady. "I'm so sorry, Lily, for doubting you, for everything." Lily leaned closer, resting her head on his shoulder. "You don't need to keep apologizing, James. What matters is that you're here now, with me, with her. That's all I ever wanted." The weight of the past. Despite their progress, James found himself haunted by memories of his time in the military. The faces of friends lost in combat, the weight of decisions made under fire, and the guilt of surviving when so many had not. All of it lingered like a heavy fog. While his family brought him joy, the scars of war were not so easily forgotten. One afternoon, as he tinkered with an old clock in the garage, Lily joined him. She stood in the doorway, watching him work in silence before finally speaking. "James," she said gently, "I've noticed that sometimes you seem far away, like you're carrying something too heavy to share." James paused, setting down his tools. He looked at her, his expression guarded but not unkind. "I don't want to burden you with it, Lily. You've already been through enough." Lily stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "I'm your wife, James. Your partner. Whatever you're carrying, I want to share it with you. That's how we heal, together." James hesitated, then exhaled deeply. "It's the memories," he admitted. "The things I saw, the things I had to do. They don't go away, Lily. Sometimes they feel like they're etched into my soul." Lily reached out, placing a hand on his cheek. "You're not alone in this. I can't erase those memories, but I can help you carry them, if you let me." For the first time, James allowed himself to be vulnerable. He began to share fragments of his experiences, moments of fear, loss, and guilt. Lily listened without judgment, her presence a steady anchor in the storm of his emotions. With each story he told, James felt a little lighter, as though the weight of his past was finally beginning to lift. A legacy of love. As summer approached, James found himself reflecting on the legacy he wanted to leave for his daughter. Eleanor's story had shown him the strength of resilience and the importance of preserving family history. He wanted his daughter to grow up knowing not only where she came from, but also the values that shaped her parents' lives. One evening, James and Lily sat together at the dining table, a notebook and pen between them. "I want to start something for her," James said. "A journal, maybe. Something she can read when she's older, so she'll know about our journey, everything we went through to become the family we are." Lily smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "I think that's a beautiful idea. Let's do it together." They began to write, taking turns to recount their story. They wrote about the joy of discovering they were going to be parents, the challenges they faced, and the lessons they learned along the way. With each entry, they wove a tapestry of love, resilience, and hope, a gift for their daughter to cherish. A future full of promise. On a warm summer morning, James stood in the yard, watching as Lily played with their daughter under the shade of a large oak tree. Her laughter echoed through the air, a sound that filled him with a profound sense of gratitude. He joined them, scooping his daughter into his arms and spinning her around as she giggled with delight. Lily watched them with a smile, her heart swelling with love. In that moment, James realized that the life he had fought so hard to build was worth every struggle. The doubts, the pain, the sacrifices, they had all led him here, to this place of peace and fulfillment. As the sun set on their little home, casting a golden glow over the world, James held Lily and their daughter close. The road ahead might still hold challenges, but he knew they would face them together. Their family, forged in love and strengthened by forgiveness, was unbreakable. And for the first time in years, James felt whole. The road to peace. The sun hung low in the sky, painting the world in hues of amber and gold. James stood at the edge of their yard, gazing at the horizon as a gentle breeze rustled the leaves above. His daughter's laughter echoed behind him as she toddled after Lily, her tiny legs carrying her in uneven but determined strides. It was a scene of quiet perfection, a slice of life James had never dared to imagine while crouched in dusty foxholes half a world away. But perfection didn't mean the absence of struggle. James had learned that true peace wasn't about erasing hardship, but finding the strength to live alongside it. The scars of his past still lingered, etched into his mind like lines on a weathered map. Yet with each passing day, he found ways to reconcile them. One moment of joy, one act of love, one step at a time. The anniversary. One summer evening, James and Lily marked their wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home. The table was set with candles, and the air was filled with the aroma of Lily's favorite dish, roasted chicken with herbs. Their daughter, now a spirited toddler, sat in a high chair, happily babbling as she mashed peas with her tiny hands. James raised his glass, his eyes locking with Lily's. "To us," he said. "To everything we've been through and everything we've built." Lily smiled, her gaze soft, but filled with unspoken emotion. "To us," she echoed, "and to the future." Their daughter clapped her hands, delighted by the toast, and James laughed, reaching out to tussle her hair. The moment was simple but profound, a reminder of the life they had reclaimed together. A soldier's past. Despite the warmth of their growing family, James couldn't ignore the whispers of his past. Some nights, as Lily slept beside him, he would wake in a cold sweat, the echoes of distant gunfire ringing in his ears. On those nights, he would slip out of bed and stand by the crib, watching his daughter sleep. Her soft breaths grounded him, pulling him back from the abyss. One particularly restless night, Lily woke to find James sitting on the porch, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. She wrapped herself in a blanket and joined him, sitting beside him in the cool night air. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked gently. James shook his head. "It's the dreams," he admitted. "They come and go, but when they hit, It feels like I'm back there, like I never left." Lily reached for his hand, her touch warm and steady. "You did leave, James, and you came home to us. The dreams might not go away, but they don't define you. What defines you is the man you've become, the father, the husband, the survivor." Her words settled over him like a balm, easing the tension in his chest. He looked at her, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for always being here. A community of healing." As James worked to heal himself, he found strength in sharing his journey with others. At Lily's encouragement, he began attending a local veterans support group. The first meeting was daunting, walking into a room of strangers, all carrying their own burdens. But as the weeks passed, James found solace in their shared experiences. He opened up about his struggles, the guilt of surviving, the weight of decisions made in the heat of battle, and the doubts that had nearly torn his family apart. In turn, he listened to the stories of others, finding camaraderie in their resilience. One evening, as the group wrapped up their meeting, a fellow veteran approached James. He was an older man, his face lined with years of hardship, but his eyes filled with a quiet strength. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," the man said, "and a good heart. Keep sharing your story. It's going to help more people than you realize." James nodded, his resolve deepening. If his journey could inspire even one person to keep fighting for their own peace, it would be worth it. The seeds of legacy. With each passing day, James grew more committed to leaving a legacy for his daughter, one rooted in love, resilience, and hope. He and Lily continued to add entries to the journal they had started, filling its pages with stories, lessons, and dreams for the future. One afternoon, as James sat under the shade of the old oak tree, his daughter toddled over to him, clutching a crayon in her tiny fist. She handed it to him with a proud smile, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Draw," she exclaimed. James chuckled, taking the crayon and pulling out a piece of paper. He began sketching simple shapes, his daughter watching intently as if he were creating a masterpiece. As he worked, he spoke to her softly. "One day, when you're older, you'll read about all the things Mommy and Daddy went through to bring us here," he said. "And you'll know that no matter what happens, you come from a family that never gives up." His daughter babbled in response, her little hand reaching for the paper. James smiled, his heart swelling with pride. She might not understand his words now, but one day she would. The road ahead. Years later, on a crisp autumn morning, James stood at the edge of their yard, watching as his daughter, now a bright and energetic child, ran through the falling leaves. Lily sat on the porch, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, her smile as radiant as ever. James turned to look at her, his heart full. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Lily nodded, her gaze soft but steady. "We have, and we'll keep going." Their journey was far from over. There would still be challenges, still be moments of doubt and fear, but James knew that they would face them together, as they always had. As he walked back toward the house, his daughter ran up to him, her arms outstretched. He scooped her up, her laughter ringing in his ears like the sweetest music. In that moment, James felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The battles of his past had shaped him, but they no longer defined him. What defined him now was the life he had built, a life filled with love, resilience, and hope for the future. And as he held his daughter close, he knew that this was the greatest victory of all, a life fully lived. As the days grew shorter and autumn painted the landscape in vibrant shades of amber and red, James felt the steady rhythm of life, settling into something extraordinary in its simplicity. The once fractured pieces of his world, his identity as a soldier, his struggles as a husband, and his transformation into a father, were now harmonizing into a whole. Yet the road to peace was never a straight line, and James was learning to embrace the twists and turns, facing the echoes. One night, James woke in a cold sweat, the vivid remnants of a dream pulling him back to his days on the battlefield. The sharp sound of gunfire, the heat of explosions, and the weight of guilt pressed against his chest. It was as though the ghosts of his past refused to let go, their grip tightening in the quiet hours of the night. James sat up, running a hand over his face. He didn't want to wake Lily. She had already carried so much of his burden. But the light from her phone screen caught his eye. She was awake, scrolling through old photos of their daughter. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly, setting her phone aside. "No," James admitted, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "It's the same dream. The faces, the sounds, they just don't go away." Lily moved closer, wrapping her arms around him. "You're still fighting, James," she whispered. "But you're not alone anymore. You've survived so much, and now it's time to let those memories rest." He leaned into her embrace, her warmth grounding him. "I want to, Lily. I really do." "Then let me help you," she said, her voice steady. "We'll face them together." Her words were a balm, soothing the ache in his chest. He held her close, silently vowing to let her in more, to share the parts of himself he had kept hidden. A growing bond. As the months passed, James found solace in the small moments. His daughter's laughter, Lily's unwavering support, and the steady rhythm of family life became his anchors. Yet there was a part of him that yearned to connect more deeply with his daughter, to show her not just the man he was now, but the man he hoped to be for her. One rainy afternoon, James decided to share a piece of his past with her in a way she could understand. He brought out a small wooden box filled with mementos from his time in the military, medals, patches, and a worn journal he had kept during his deployments. His daughter, now curious and talkative, sat on the floor beside him, her eyes wide with fascination. "What's that, Addie?" she asked, pointing to one of the medals. "This," James said, holding it up, "is something I earned while I was a soldier. It's a reminder of the people I fought beside and the things we overcame together." "Were you brave?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. James smiled, his heart swelling at her innocence. "I tried to be. But sometimes being brave means asking for help when you're scared." Her little hands reached for the medal, and he placed it gently in her palm. "You're brave too, sweetheart," he said. "And one day you'll do amazing things." She beamed at him, her joy infectious, and in that moment, James felt a deeper bond forming between them. Strength in community. James's involvement in the local veterans group had become a cornerstone of his healing journey. Through sharing his story and listening to others, he found a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since leaving the military. The group had also become a source of inspiration, motivating James to give back in ways he hadn't considered before. At one meeting, an idea began to take shape. Several of the members expressed a desire to create a space where veterans and their families could reconnect with one another and the wider community. James, energized by the idea, volunteered to help organize the effort. Months of planning and collaboration culminated in a community event, a day filled with activities for families, workshops for veterans, and opportunities to share stories. James brought Lily and their daughter to the event, proud to show them the fruits of his labor. As he watched families laughing, children playing, and veterans connecting, James felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was his way of honoring the past while building a brighter future. The gift of forgiveness. Though life was moving forward, James knew there was still one person he needed to forgive. Himself. The weight of his actions, the losses he had endured, and the doubts he had harbored continued to cast shadows over his mind. One evening, as he sat by the fireplace with Lily, he voiced what had been troubling him. "I've forgiven others," he said quietly, "but I don't know how to forgive myself." Lily took his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "James, forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about accepting that you did the best you could with what you had at the time. You've carried so much for so long. It's okay to let go." Her words struck a chord deep within him. He realized that forgiveness wasn't a single act, but a journey, a process of learning to see himself not as a soldier defined by war, but as a man defined by love, resilience, and growth. a vision for the future. As their daughter grew, James and Lily continued to nurture her with the values they held dear. They encouraged her curiosity, celebrated her achievements, and taught her the importance of compassion and strength. One evening, as they sat together in the backyard, James looked at Lily and their daughter, his heart full. "I want her to know that no matter what life throws at her, she has the strength to overcome it," he said. Lily nodded, her gaze steady. "And she'll know that because she has us, her family, as her foundation." James smiled, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but he was no longer afraid. He had faced the storms, and now he stood in the sunlight, ready to embrace whatever came next. A family united. Years later, as James watched his daughter graduate from college, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The little girl he had once doubted was now a strong, confident young woman, ready to take on the world. Beside him, Lily squeezed his hand, her smile reflecting the same pride and love he felt. Their journey had been long and fraught with trials, but it had also been filled with moments of profound joy and growth. Together, they had built a life rooted in forgiveness, resilience, and hope, a legacy that would live on in their daughter. As the crowd cheered and their daughter turned to wave, James felt an overwhelming sense of peace. He had found his purpose, his family, and his place in the world. And in that moment, he knew that he was finally whole.